If you sit down and do an interview with somebody, how much of the questions is coming straight from your brain versus like somebody sort of preparing thoughts beforehand?
Well, I have an assistant, Evan, who's been with me for years now, and me and him have sort of worked out kind of a research kind of skeleton, I guess, for every guest. He understands the types of interviews that I do with the types of people. Is this going to be one of these first interviews where it's more of like a life story thing, or is this more of a current events kind of interview? So he knows kind of how to structure that. And then I'll just spend, like a couple of days, just kind of going through those questions, taking out certain questions, adding my own, doing my own research, kind of creating certain things that he may not have covered, or just going off in a whole different direction. And then from there, I'll kind of have an overall game plan. And, and then we'll see whether we follow it. Are we going to follow it from beginning to end, or halfway through does it all get thrown out the window and we do something completely different?
Right.
But there is a lot of research.
Right.
Like I'm not just winging it, and a lot of people do.
Right, I'm winging it right now. See,
Right.
I just call it raw dogging it. Like, I got to interview this pretty famous porn star later, and my girlfriend was like, you should watch this interview that she did. I'm like, nah, I'm just a raw dog it. It's like two very different styles, because it would be one thing to interview her and say, well, I got these 10 fucking banger things to ask you. Or, I could just sort of, like, for me, mine is much more conversational. It's about just, having a nice chat.
Yeah, man, I think both styles have their merits. I think that with me, whenever I did it, in terms of like the off the cuff style that you're talking about, afterwards I'd be like, damn, I should have asked him that. And had I written it down, I would have asked him.
In the middle of this interview, I was like, man, I forgot to ask Big Boy about being on that Vince Staples album, which would have been.
This is what happened. It's like the regret kept happening whenever I would wing it. Because I interviewed Kanye back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, I don't have it anymore. It was an audio interview in the studio when he was working with Common on his album. There's a picture with like the three of us out there.
And you just didn't have a camera guy at that time?
Well, we weren't really, I was doing mixtapes back then. So a camera wasn't even part of the, we're talking about like 2004, 15 years ago. But like, I remember just not really having any questions, and he just kept freestyling because he knew I didn't have any questions.
He's got to be one of the easiest people to interview.
Yeah, man, he, like, I'll put it like this. The Kanye that you see in 2019 was exactly the Kanye that I met and talked to in 2004.
Really?
And this was before his first hit song, like Slow Jams, he played it for me in the studio for the first time. Which became his first big hit.
Did it seem clear to you that this was going to be a massive song?
Yeah, I knew that was going to be a hit.
Yeah.
It was
a
dope ass song, yeah. But it was like, yeah, he was just Kanye the producer who was trying to rap. There's been lots of producers that have tried to rap.
It's very rare that it works.
Pieces don't come together. Now he's known more of a rapper as a producer, but back then it was like, that's the guy that does the Jay-Z beats. Like, but when I heard that song, it was like, okay, this is a hit.
Did you have a different vision for what Vlad TV was going to be at a certain point? Because there'll be random interviews that I go to watch, and you'll have just different people doing the interview instead of you, and nowadays it seems like it's all you.
Yeah, you go through different cycles with your business, right? You don't really know where your business is going to lead until you try out different things. So at one point, I would have my staff interview people, and the first Cardi B interview was done with a staff member. The second Cardi B interview was done with me. They're both good interviews. I'm not going to say one is necessarily better than the other, but after a while, because I was thinking like, well, listen, I'm growing, I'm getting bigger, I need to branch off and I need to focus on certain things, and maybe having other people do interviews just under my platform might be the thing. But, at one point I just said, well, it just seems like the interviews turn out better when I do them myself. And if I want to keep building the platform, I'm going to have to I want it to be bigger, I'm going to have to put more pressure on my shoulders. And I'll just start doing them all myself. So like this year, if you look at the last few years, I've done all the interviews. Right. And it may change. You never know. But at this point, it's like, okay, this just works out better business-wise.
Yeah, because there's like a part of you that's like, especially in yours, because you could have somebody else behind the camera. You've always been behind the camera. It sort of makes it easier for you to sub different people in. You know, like even me, I see that Cardi B thumbnail, and it's been so long since I watched it that I wasn't thinking about the fact that you didn't actually do that interview.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, there's a part of you that's like, I want to develop a whole bunch of different personalities that can sort of, I can be more like the coach, but then after a while, it sort of occurs to you like, shit, if I'm not going to be happy with the results of this with anybody else doing it.
Yeah, and you know, this is not going to go on forever. I can't be 100 years old
Right.
and interview an 18-year-old. It's going to be weird.
Does that ever feel weird to you when you have to interview somebody super young, or the lifestyle that they're expressing is so obviously a bad idea? Like if somebody were to come in and start talking about drugs and guns as if it's the best shit ever, and you're sitting there and you're somebody, you've seen this 100 times before, there's a part of you that wants to say, bro, that's not it.
I mean, but I do say that. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I've interviewed, I've interviewed Lil Blurry, which you've interviewed before. I've interviewed a couple kids, you know, underaged, you know, kids that had to have someone else sign their release form.
Like at the skate park, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I mean, I remember we got an interview. I'm not going to say who it is, but it was an underage kid, who I think you've interviewed. And we were going to do an interview with him. And as I started reviewing my notes, I started to realize that he was like 15 and he's talking about doing drugs all throughout his music as a 15-year-old. And I'm like, nah, I'm good.
Really?
Yeah, I just canceled it.
Lil Mosey?
Don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Don't think so. I think, I don't think it was Lil Mosey.
Well, there's plenty of people that could probably fit that description.
Yeah, but it was just like, all right, you know, and even with Lil Blurry, I said, hey, there was a song about you talking about lean, and he's like, oh no, he's like, no, you're right, I took that off right away. This is not what I'm trying to present.
And him being signed to Boosie is like so hilarious, because it's like there's nobody who can tell you about why you shouldn't do lean better than fucking Boosie.
Boosie, yeah, man. So yeah, man. I mean, in terms of, I mean, even when I'm interviewing dudes in their 20s or 30s, like you'll see a very serious, you know, tone to what I do. I don't glorify doing crimes. I don't glorify doing drugs, hard drugs. I don't glorify stealing, robbing. I don't glorify throwing money away at the strip clubs. You know, Vlad talks about investment. I talk about long-term goals. I talk about building businesses. I honestly want, I mean, everyone that I interview, I want to interview them a year later and have them be twice as successful, twice as wealthy, out of jail. Like, I want them to be doing well. I'm not trying to glorify something that I know as someone in my 40s has a dead end and has a bad ending. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah, I go through that all the time. And I mean, in terms of interviewing younger people, man, I mean, at this point, I could do it. You know, 10 years from now, I may not be able to do it. I mean, I may have to hire somebody that will interview more of a younger generation. But, you know, for now, it's, you know, it's dope. You know, I think that a lot of people grow up, you know, we launched in 2008, so we're like 11 years into it. A lot of people grew up aspiring to be rappers, watching Vlad TV interviews, hoping one day to make it.
That's such a good feeling, right? That once you realize like that there's like another generation coming up to which you were something that they were raised from day one on. That's a freaky feeling.
Yeah, man. I mean, you know, Big Boy, he went on Instagram recently to talk about the Kodak Black Lauryn Hill comments, and he said something interesting. He said, I was raised by hip hop and I raised hip hop. And I kind of feel the same way to a certain degree. Like, I was raised by hip hop, and the content I put out has raised a generation of upcoming rappers. You know, I remember how excited Big Sean was when I first interviewed him when he first got signed, and it's like that feeling is always like, this is so, like, it makes everything worthwhile when stuff like that happens.
No, totally. Just to be involved in the story, because seeing somebody go from nothing to something in a short period of time is always so amazing, even if you're just somebody watching on the outside. And then to have any sort of involvement, or especially when you play like a really critical role in that, like when you feel like your interview content becomes like this indispensable resource that like their career might not have unfolded the same way if you didn't have that conversation.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, anyone who is thinking about joining a gang, go watch that Mob James interview, and I can guarantee you, you're probably gonna reassess your mindset. I mean, some people are born into that situation, and it just is what it is. But if you actually say, okay, like, do I want to join the Crips or the Bloods or MS-13 or the Mexican Mafia or whatever other Latin Kings, BD, GD, whatever. Watch these interviews and see the amount of heartache and loss that goes into this particular lifestyle, and then decide whether you want to do it knowing everything. And I think that we've stopped a lot of people from making bad decisions with our interviews over the years.
No, probably. I mean, the best thing that you can do is just put the information out there and just have as many people as possible take it in, and just hope that they're able to find the best possible message in that. Because anybody could look at there's a million kids who watched American History X and said, oh, being a Nazi is bad. But there's still thousands of people who saw that fucking movie that is all about how being a Nazi is bad and still went and became Nazis.
Yeah, man, sometimes you gotta learn the hard way.
Yeah.
I think that's part of being a kid, is that you think that everyone older than you just doesn't know. It's full of shit. But I think I say this a lot, like, to anybody who wants to be successful, realistically, you should look at the people in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s and see how they did it. Don't look at the little pumps who managed to catch a wave and ride it to being a millionaire. The odds of you being Lil Pump is much smaller than you being, the CEO of, a company that makes a couple $1 million a year. You have much more chances of doing that than to be Lil Pump. And a lot of people like to say that being an old head or whatever is not what they want to do, but it takes a lot of intelligence and common sense to get to my age, to not leave the earth in their 20s and 30s by just doing irresponsible shit.